A clerk from the county courthouse called me the evening before the hearing, a young man whose voice I recognized. "Judge Ellison? I know I shouldn't call. But you were kind to me when I started here, and I couldn't sit on this." He lowered his voice. "Your son filed a guardianship petition. He's asking the court to declare you mentally incompetent and hand him control of your person and your entire estate. The hearing is tomorrow at 9. And, sir, he requested Judge Pruitt, and he's bringing a doctor who's prepared to testify that you have dementia." I sat very still in my study, surrounded by 40 years of law books. My son was going to stand in a courtroom tomorrow and try to prove his father's mind was gone. He forgot that for 40 years, the mind he was calling gone had been the one on the bench. Welcome back to the Forgotten Father. Grab your coffee, get comfortable, and remember the people in these stories had every chance to do right by the ones who raised them. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. You're going to want to stay till the end. My name is Rutherford Ellison. I am 78 years old. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, in a house full of books. I drive a 15-year-old Buick. I wear a cardigan, and I do the crossword in ink. I am a quiet man now. I keep to myself. Most people who see me at the library see an old man moving slow, and they hold the door, and they think nothing more. That's fine. But I want to tell you a secret, and you'll need it before this is over, so hold on to it. For 40 years, I was a judge. I started as a trial lawyer, then a district judge, and I finished my career on the State Court of Appeals. 4 decades on the bench, I have presided over more cases than I can count. I have written opinions that are still cited in law schools. I have seen every kind of lie a human being can tell under oath, and I learned to spot each one. I know the rules of evidence the way you know your own name. I know exactly how a courtroom works, from the inside, from the highest chair in the room. My son knows I was a judge. He does not understand what that means. He thinks it's a title, like a plaque on the wall. He does not understand that it lives in my bones, that you can take the robe off an old judge, but you cannot take the 40 years out of him. Let me tell you where I came from. Because it matters. I was not born to the law. My father was a tobacco farmer. My mother took in washing. We had dirt floors. I was the first in my family to finish high school, let alone college. I worked nights in a mill to pay for law school. I know exactly what it is to be looked down on, to be the poor kid in the room full of rich men's sons. That's why I became the kind of judge I was. I never forgot the small people, the ones without lawyers, the ones the powerful tried to steamroll. From the bench, I protected them. For 40 years, I made a career out of catching the strong when they tried to crush the weak with paperwork and hired experts. I never dreamed that at the end of my life, the strong man crushing the weak one would be my own son, and the weak one would be me. I met Helen in 1968, my first year of law school. She was a nurse. She worked double shifts so I could study. She believed in me before I'd won a single case. 51 years we had. She sat in the gallery for my swearing into the Court of Appeals and cried so hard the bailiff brought her tissues. She was my whole heart. When she died, something in me went quiet and stayed quiet. I stopped fighting. I stopped being the sharp man of the courtroom and became just a widower who missed his wife. And that quiet, that grief, is exactly what my son mistook for weakness. He saw a broken old man. He forgot that a sword doesn't stop being a sword just because it's been set down for a while. Let me tell you about my son. His name is Bennett. He's 52. Bennett had every advantage: good schools, paid for; a law degree, paid for, which he never really used. He tried business, tried real estate, tried a dozen things, and he was always, somehow, a year away from broke, living a life bigger than his income. And for the last few years he'd been circling my estate like a patient vulture, asking about my will, about my accounts, about whether I'd considered simplifying things. I have a comfortable estate, not enormous, but real. A lifetime of careful saving, a paid-off house, investments, and Bennett had decided he couldn't wait for me to die to get it. My wife Helen would have seen it coming years before I did. She read people better than I read statutes. She passed 2 years ago. And since then, I've been quiet and slow and grieving, and I think Bennett mistook my grief for decline. He'd come by and find me sitting still, lost in a memory of Helen, and he decided the stillness meant my mind was going. He started documenting it. Little things. He'd ask me a question. I'd pause to think. He'd note it as confusion. He'd move my reading glasses. Then, when I looked for them, he'd sigh. "See, Dad? You're forgetting again." He started visiting more, but never to sit with me. Always with a notebook. Always asking me the date, the day, the president, like little tests. I thought he was worried about me. He was building a file on me. He recorded a phone call once. I didn't know until later. He got the neighbors to say I seemed slower. He was assembling evidence, brick by brick, in my own living room, while I poured him coffee. And I, the judge, the man who spent 40 years spotting exactly this kind of scheme, was slow to see it. Do you know why? Because I loved him. Love is the one blindfold that fits every set of eyes. It made a fool of a Court of Appeals judge. That's how strong it is. That's how they get you. Helen's chair still sits by the window. Bennett moved it once, to make space, and I moved it right back. He looked at me moving a chair to where my dead wife used to sit, and I watched him write something down. My grief was evidence to him. My love for his mother was a symptom. That's the coldest part. He took the truest, most human thing left in me, an old man missing his wife, and he tried to turn it into proof I belonged in a ward. There is a special kind of evil in weaponizing someone's grief. I've sentenced men for less. He was building a case against me. In my own house, and I, the judge, was slow to see that I had become a defendant. Here's what actually hurt. It wasn't the greed. Greed I've seen 1,000 times from the bench. It was that my own son looked at me, a man who spent 40 years protecting the vulnerable, dispensing justice, holding the powerful accountable, and he saw prey. He saw a confused old man to be legally dismantled and robbed with the court's own blessing. Some of you know that particular cold. When the person who's supposed to protect you in your old age is the one drawing up the papers. When he's not himself anymore, becomes the weapon they use to take everything. It is a lonely thing to be turned into a case file by your own child. I want to speak to you directly for a moment. Because this one is real, and it happens more than you know. There is a quiet epidemic in this country. Adult children using the courts to rob their aging parents. They call it guardianship. Conservatorship, they dress theft up in the language of love. He's not himself anymore. She can't manage. We're just trying to protect them. And a judge, overworked and trusting, signs a paper, and a whole human being disappears into someone else's control. Their money, their home, their freedom. Gone. I saw it from the bench for years, and it haunted me. The parents sitting there, confused, betrayed, unable to fight back because the very act of fighting gets used as proof they're irrational. It is the cruelest legal weapon there is. And most of the victims never see it coming because the person holding the weapon is the child they trusted. If you are old, or you love someone who is, please hear me. Watch for it. Document your capacity while you still clearly have it. Because the day they file, they are counting on you being too slow, too grieved, too trusting to stop them. I almost was. I was a judge, and I almost was. If you've made it this far, do me one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it. But it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you. Genuinely. Now let me tell you what a guardianship really is. Let me explain what my son was trying to do, because it's more sinister than most people realize. A guardianship, sometimes called a conservatorship, is when a court decides an adult can no longer manage their own affairs and hands control of their life to someone else. Their money, their medical decisions, where they live. It exists to protect people who genuinely can't protect themselves. But it is also, in the wrong hands, the most complete theft the law allows. Because once a court declares you incompetent and names your guardian, you lose almost everything. You cannot sign a contract. You cannot hire your own lawyer. You cannot even challenge the guardianship easily, because you've been declared incapable of doing so. Bennett wasn't just trying to get my money. He was trying to get a court to legally erase me, to make me a ward. A non-person, managed by him, funded by my own estate, with no way to fight back. And he almost had the perfect setup. He'd filed in a hurry, on a day he thought I wouldn't be ready. He'd hired a doctor, the kind who testifies for a fee, prepared to diagnose dementia after a brief, slanted examination. He'd requested a particular judge. He'd told the court I was too impaired to understand the proceedings, which is a clever trick, because it lets them push it through while the target is still figuring out what's happening. He thought he was moving too fast for the doddering old man to respond. He forgot who the doddering old man used to be. So I did what I have done my entire life. I went to work, quietly and precisely. I did not panic. Panic is what they expect from the impaired. I called an old friend, a woman named Margaret Doyle, one of the finest elder law attorneys in the state, who had argued cases before me for 20 years and who answered my call within the hour. I told her everything. And Margaret, God bless her, said, "Rutherford, they filed a guardianship against a court of appeals judge. This is going to be the shortest hearing in the history of Wake County." Then we got to work. Because I wasn't going to just defend myself. I was going to teach my son, and that fee-for-hire doctor, and everyone in that courtroom, exactly what it means to underestimate a man who spent 40 years running the room. First, we gathered evidence of my capacity. Not just a doctor's note. I sat for a full, rigorous cognitive evaluation with a respected neurologist, recorded and documented, which I passed without a single concern. Margaret pulled my recent work, because I still, quietly, consulted on legal questions and had written a scholarly article just months before. A demented man does not publish law review articles. We prepared documentation of every financial decision I'd made, all sound, all careful. And then Margaret did something I want you to remember. She researched the doctor Bennett had hired. It turned out this doctor had a history. He'd been reprimanded before for exactly this, for cursory exams that produced whatever diagnosis the paying party wanted. Margaret had the records. We were ready. But I asked her for one thing. I asked to be allowed to speak for myself at the right moment. She smiled and said, "Your Honor, I wouldn't dream of taking that from you." The morning of the hearing, I put on my good dark suit, the one I used to wear under the robe, and I drove my old Buick to the courthouse, where I had spent half my life. Walking into that building as a respondent, a man whose competence was on trial, was the strangest feeling of my life. But I held my head up. Bennett was already there, with his lawyer and his hired doctor. And when he saw me, he put on a face of deep, false concern. "Dad," he said gently, loud enough for others to hear, "I'm so glad you came. I know this is confusing. Just try to relax. We're doing this because we love you." Performing for the room. Establishing the narrative. The loving son managing his poor confused father. I looked at my boy, and I said quietly, "Bennett, I understand exactly what's happening. Better than you do, I suspect." Something flickered in his eyes. Doubt, maybe. He pushed it down. The hearing began. Bennett's lawyer laid out the case. My son took the stand and told the court, with practiced sorrow, that his father's mind had deteriorated, that I was forgetful, confused. No longer able to manage my affairs, a danger to myself. He did it well. If I hadn't been the man in the chair, I might have believed him. Then they called the doctor, who testified, in confident medical language, that based on his examination, I showed clear signs of significant cognitive impairment consistent with dementia. He recommended immediate guardianship. Bennett's lawyer thanked him and sat down, satisfied. They thought it was over. They thought the old man had been buried under the weight of a doctor's white coat. Then it was our turn. And I asked the judge, respectfully, if I might address the court myself. There was some surprise. Bennett's lawyer objected, said the respondent's impairment made his testimony unreliable, which is the trap, you see. But the judge, an honest man, said he would hear me. So I stood up, 78 years old in my old courtroom suit, and 40 years came back into my spine. Your Honor, I began, and my voice was the voice I'd used from the bench for 4 decades, clear and measured and utterly in command. I spent 40 years in courtrooms like this one, 16 of them on the Court of Appeals of this state. I have written opinions that the attorneys in this room studied in law school. I saw the judge's eyebrows rise. I saw Bennett go pale. I am going to demonstrate my competence not by protesting it, but by exercising it. So let us examine the petition against me on its legal merits. And then I did what I was born to do. I dismantled it, piece by piece, in real time. I addressed the doctor's testimony first. I cited the diagnostic standard for the dementia he claimed, by name. Then I walked through his examination, point by point. It failed to meet a single requirement. I noted, for the record, that a real evaluation needs validated instruments given over time. Then I asked the doctor one question. I asked him to name the standardized cognitive tests he had used on me. He fumbled. He looked at his notes. He had no answer, because he hadn't used any. He'd spent 20 minutes with me and written a diagnosis for a fee. Then Margaret rose. She entered into the record the doctor's prior disciplinary history. He'd been reprimanded before, for exactly this. Cursory exams. Diagnoses for hire. The courtroom shifted. The white coat had lost its magic. It was just a man in a suit who'd been caught. Then I addressed my own mind. I entered my full neurological evaluation. Clean, no impairment of any kind. I entered the Law Review article I'd published 4 months earlier. Then I did something simple. I recited, from memory, the legal standard for guardianship in this state. The burden of proof. The 3 prior cases most relevant to it, by name and citation. I did not stumble once. Then I looked at the judge. Your Honor, I said, a man in the condition my son describes cannot do what I am doing right now. This petition does not fail to prove I'm incompetent. It proves the opposite. It proves the man who filed it either did not understand the law, or hoped this court wouldn't notice. The room was silent. The judge was looking at Bennett now, and it was not a kind look. And then I did the last thing. I turned, and I addressed my son directly, with the court's permission. And I did not shout. I have never once shouted in a courtroom. The quiet voice is the one they remember. Bennett, I said, you brought your father to court and tried to have him erased. You hired a man to lie about my mind so you could take my life's savings while I was still alive to watch you do it. I have sat on the bench and watched strangers do this to their parents, and every time it broke my heart. I never imagined I would see it from my own son. I paused. You forgot something. You spent your whole life around a judge, and you never once learned what a judge actually is. It is not a robe. It is not a title on a wall. It is 40 years of learning to see exactly the kind of lie you told this court today. You didn't just lose this case, son. You revealed yourself. In a courtroom. On the record. Forever, Bennett's face had drained to nothing. His lawyer was gathering papers, trying to disappear. The judge dismissed the petition in about 90 seconds, and he did not hide his disgust doing it. He noted for the record that the petition appeared to be a bad faith attempt at financial exploitation, and he suggested, pointedly, that the matter might warrant review by other authorities. My son had come to erase his father, and he left the courtroom a smaller, more exposed man than he had ever been in his life. Now, I want to tell you what I did next, because you might expect me to press charges, to ruin him. And I could have. The judge had all but invited it. But I am in the end still a father, and Helen's boy is still Helen's boy. So I did not pursue criminal charges. What I did instead was permanent and quiet, the way I do everything. I changed my estate plan completely. The son who tried to take my estate by declaring me insane will now receive from it exactly $1 and a copy of the court transcript, so he will always know precisely why. The rest goes to a foundation I established that does one thing. It provides free legal defense to elderly people facing exactly the kind of predatory guardianship my son tried to use against me. Every dollar Bennett tried to steal will now spend the rest of its existence stopping people like Bennett. There is a justice in that more complete than any prison sentence. There is one grandchild I have to tell you about. Bennett's daughter, my granddaughter Claire, she's 24, in law school, and she is nothing like her father. When she learned what Bennett had done, she was horrified. She came to me and she said, "Grandpa, I want to do what you did today. For people who can't do it for themselves." She's going into elder law. She's going to run that foundation one day. Out of my whole family, the one who inherited my heart for justice was the one who never wanted a dime of my estate. She just wanted to learn how to protect people. She'll get the books when I'm gone. All 40 years of them. She's the proof it was all worth it. I have to tell you about the moment after, when the judge dismissed it. I didn't feel triumph. I want to be honest with you. I felt grief. I looked across that courtroom at my son gathering his papers, not meeting my eyes, and I did not see a defeated opponent. I saw a little boy, the one I taught to ride a bike, the one whose fevers Helen and I sat up with. And I understood, all at once, that he was gone. Not dead. Gone. The son I thought I had did not exist, and maybe never had. That's the real loss in a story like this. You don't just win the case. You finally stop hoping. And the hoping was the last warm thing I had left of him. A man can survive being robbed. It's being robbed by your own child that takes the years off you. I aged a decade in that courtroom, even as I won. I still do the crossword in ink. I still drive the old Buick. My mind, I am pleased to report, is exactly where I left it. Bennett and I don't speak now. He sent one message, months later, asking if we could move past it. I did not reply. Some doors a man closes himself, and it is not the father's job to reopen them. I loved my son. I love him still, in the complicated way you love someone who has shown you exactly who they are. But love does not require me to hand the pen back to the man who tried to write me out of my own life. Here's what I want to leave you with. The law is a tool. And like any tool, it can build or it can steal. Depending on the hand that holds it. There is a quiet epidemic in this country of adult children using guardianship to rob their own parents, dressing theft up as concern, hiring doctors to swear that he's not himself anymore. If you are old, or if you love someone who is, know this. Keep your capacity documented. Know your rights. And never assume that the person calling you confused has your interests at heart. My son thought he could erase a judge because the judge had gotten quiet. He forgot that quiet is not the same as gone. Do not let anyone, not even your own child, convince a court that you have disappeared while you are still standing right there, entirely yourself. Stand up. Address the court. And remind them exactly who you are. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being part of this family.